All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas, and I do educational videos on many different subjects. But we've been locked in on the reciprocal system of theory for the last several months. Um, and the reciprocal system of theory is a theory of everything that was first devised by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century up until his death in 1990. And the theory has been carried forward in the 30 years since then by a number of other researchers. But it is still virtually unknown. Very, very few people know about it, but I think it's a powerful tool because it enables us to do science, and we don't have to look to the scientific establishment for all our answers. And when they are BSing us, we can figure it out. We don't have to listen to what they say. So the basic idea behind Larson's theory is that the universe is not a universe of matter, not a universe of energy, but a universe of motion. And motion is, for Larson, the relationship between space and time. Space and time are reciprocals. They have a reciprocal relation to one another. And we've just gotten started. We're in the preface of looking at one of his books called Nothing But Motion. This book is the first of a 3-volume series called The Structure of the Physical Universe. This is Larson's magnum opus that came out in the 80s when he was in his 80s. And this book, I think, came out in 1979 or 1980. And this covers mostly physics and a little bit of organic chemistry. And we just read the first part of the preface, and he was just talking here about the general reciprocal relation between space and time. And he basically had an epiphany when he recognized that the equations that he had been working on in his experiments and his trials, a lot of answers came out. A lot of things reconciled each other when he assumed that time and space had a reciprocal relation. And he was kind of like, well, what is that about? What is the idea of a reciprocal of space? And he says, one might well talk of the reciprocal of a pail of water or the reciprocal of a fence post. But on further consideration, I could see that the idea is not so absurd after all. The only relation between space and time of which we have any actual knowledge is motion. And in motion, space and time do have a reciprocal relation. If one airplane travels twice as fast as another, it makes no difference whether we say it travels twice as far in the same time or that it travels the same distance in half the time. This is not necessarily a general reciprocal relation, but the fact that it is a reciprocal relation gives the idea of a general relation a considerable degree of plausibility. So I took the next step and started considering what the consequences of a reciprocal relation of this nature might be. Much to my surprise, it was immediately obvious that such a relation leads directly to simple and logical answers to no less than half a dozen problems of long-standing and widely separated physical fields. Those of you who have never had occasion to study the foundations of physical theory in depth probably do not realize what an extraordinary result this actually is. Every theory of present-day physical science has been formulated to apply specifically in some one physical field, and not a single one of these theories can provide answers to major questions in any other field. They may help to provide these answers, but in no case can any of them arrive at such an answer unassisted. Yet here in the reciprocal postulate, we find a theory of the relation between space and time that leads directly, without any assistance from any other theoretical assumptions or from empirical facts, to simple and logical answers to many different problems in many different fields. This is something completely unprecedented. A theory based on the reciprocal relation accomplishes on a wholesale scale what no other theory can do at all. To illustrate what I'm talking about, let us consider the recession of the distant galaxies. As most of you know, astronomical observations indicate that the most distant galaxies are receding from the Earth at speeds which approach the speed of light. No conventional physical theory can explain this recession. Indeed, even if you put all of the theories of conventional physics together, you still have no explanation of this phenomenon. In order to arrive at any such explanation, the astronomers have to make some assumption or assumptions specifically applicable to the recession itself. The current favorite, the Big Bang theory, assumes a gigantic explosion at some hypothetical singular point in the past in which the entire contents of the universe were thrown out into space at their present high speeds. The rival steady state theory assumes the continual creation of new matter, which in some unspecified way creates a pressure that pushes the galaxies apart at the speeds now observed. But the reciprocal postulate, an assumption that was made to account for the magnitudes of the interatomic distances in the solid state, gives us an explanation of the galactic recession without the necessity of making any assumptions about that recession or about about that are receding, about that recession or about the fact that they are receding. I'm not sure. That's a typo. It is not even necessary to arrive at any any claim as to what a galaxy is. Obviously, it must be something, or its existence could not be recognized. And as long as it is something, the reciprocal relation tells us that it must be moving outward, away from our location at the speed of light, because the location which it occupies is so moving. On the basis of this relation, the spatial separation between any two physical locations, the elapsed distance, as we may call it, is increasing at the same rate as the elapsed time. Of course, any new answer to a major question that is provided by a new theory leaves some subsidiary questions that require further consideration. But the road to the resolution of these subsidiary issues is clear once the primary problem is overcome. The explanation of the recession, the reason why the most distant galaxies recede with the speed of light, leaves us with the question as to why the closer galaxies have lower recession speeds, but the answer to this question is obvious, since we know that gravitation exerts a retarding effect, which is greater at the shorter distances. Another example of the many major issues of long standing that are resolved almost automatically by the reciprocal postulate is the mechanism of the propagation of electromagnetic radiation. Here again, no conventional physical theory is able to give us an explanation. As in the case of the galactic recession, it is necessary to make some assumption about the radiation itself before any kind of a theory can be formulated. And in this instance, conventional thinking has not even been able to produce an acceptable hypothesis. Newton's assumption of light corpuscles traveling in the manner of bullets from a gun and the rival hypothesis of waves in a hypothetical ether were both eventually rejected. There is a rather general impression that Einstein supplied an explanation, but Einstein himself makes no such claim. In one of his books, he points out what a difficult problem this actually is, and he concludes with this statement. Okay, so this is a quote from Einstein. Our only way out seems to be to take for granted the fact that space has the physical property of transmitting electromagnetic waves and not to bother too much about the meaning of this statement. End quote. So, as matters now stand, conventional science has no explanation at all for this fundamental physical phenomenon. But here, too, the reciprocal postulate gives us a simple and logical explanation. It is, in fact, the same explanation that accounts for the recession of the distant galaxies. Here again, there is no need to make any assumption about the photon itself. It is not even necessary to know what a photon is. As long as it is something, it is carried outward at the speed of light by the motion of the spatial location which it occupies. No more than a minimum amount of consideration was required in order to see that the answers to a number of other physical problems of long standing similarly emerged easily and naturally on application of the reciprocal postulate. This was clearly something that had to be followed up. No investigator who arrived at this point could stop without going on to see just how far the consequences of the reciprocal relation would extend. The results of that further investigation constitute what we now know as the reciprocal system of theory. As I have already said, it is not a construction and not a revelation. Now you can see just what it is. It is nothing more nor less than the total of the consequences that result if there is a general reciprocal relation between space and time. As matters now stand, the details of the new theoretical system, so far as they have been developed, can be found in my publications and those of my associates, but the system of theory is not coextensive with what has thus far been written about it. In reality, it consists of any and all of the consequences that follow when we adopt the hypothesis of a general reciprocal relation between space and time. A general recognition of this point would go a long way toward meeting some of our communication problems. Certainly, no one should have any objection to an investigation of the consequences of such a hypothesis. Indeed, anyone who is genuinely interested in the advancement of science and who realizes the unprecedented scope of these consequences can hardly avoid wanting to find out just how far they actually extend. As a German reviewer expressed it, only a careful consideration of all of the author's deliberations can show whether or not he is right. The official schools of natural philosophy should not shun this effort. After all, we are concerned here with questions of fundamental significance. Yet, as all of you undoubtedly know, the scientific community, particularly that segment of the community that we are accustomed to call the establishment, is very reluctant to permit general discussion of the theory in the journals and in scientific meetings. They are not contending that the conclusions we have reached are wrong. They are simply trying to ignore them and hope that they will eventually go away. This is, of course, a thoroughly unscientific attitude, but since it exists, we have to deal with it. And for this purpose, it will be helpful to have some idea of the thinking that underlies the opposition. There are some individuals who simply do not want their thinking disturbed and are not open to any kind of argument. William James, in one of his books, reports a conversation that he had with a prominent scientist concerning what we now call ESP. This man, says James, contended that even if ESP is a reality, scientists should band together to keep that fact from becoming known, since the existence of any such thing would cause havoc in the fundamental thought of science. Some individuals, no doubt, feel the same way about the reciprocal relation. And so far as these persons are concerned, there is not much that we can do. There is no argument that can counter an arbitrary refusal to consider what we have to offer. This all sounds quite familiar, doesn't it? Not just in science, but in almost every realm of thinking that's out there at this point. Their main weapon is censorship, just to silence you. They don't want to engage on the merits of any type of argument. They just want you to shut up. Okay, going on with Larson. In most cases, however, the opposition is based on a misunderstanding of our position. The issue between the supporters of rival scientific theories normally is, which is the better theory? The basic question involved is which theory agrees more closely with the observations and measurements in the physical areas to which the theories apply. But since all such theories are specifically constructed specifically constructed to the observations, the decision usually has been to rest. I'm sorry, there's just a couple typos here. The decision usually has to rest to a large degree on preferences and prejudices of a philosophical or other non-scientific nature. Most of those who encounter the reciprocal system of theory for the first time take it for granted that we are simply raising another issue or several issues of the same kind. The astronomers, for instance, are under the impression that we are contending that the outward progression of the natural reference system is a better explanation of the recession of the distant galaxies than the Big Bang. But this is not our contention at all. We have found that we need to postulate a general reciprocal relation between space and time in order to explain certain fundamental physical phenomena that cannot be explained by any conventional physical theory. But once we have postulated this relationship, it supplies simple and logical answers for the major problems that arise in all physical areas. Thus, our contention is not that we have a better assortment of theories to replace the Big Bang and other specialized theories of limited scope, but we have a general theory that applies to all physical fields. These theories of limited applicability are therefore totally unnecessary. So, he's really contending that the reciprocal system of theory replaces all science, all fields. Whatever they've come up with in the various fields is just a kind of like a stopgap measure. It's a pastiche of all these different theories. Each theory has been designed to answer one specific question, just like he's saying with the Big Bang. They observed the recession of the distant galaxies and they had no explanation. So they went to the Big Bang to answer specifically that one question about the recession of the distant galaxies, that one observation. That's the only reason that the Big Bang exists, is to answer that one question. And that's how physical theory is in many other fields. The newest theory, or the satisfactory theory in the legacy science. These are all theories that are designed to answer just one question or two questions. Larson's theory answers all questions. So that's another reason why we should pay attention. And that's one reason why I love Larson, is that he's a sophisticated understanding of the history of science. Okay, we're going to just go one more paragraph here. While this present volume is described as the first unit of a revised and enlarged edition, the revisions are actually few and far between. As stated earlier, there have been no substantive changes in the postulates since they were originally formulated. Inasmuch as the entire structure of theory has been derived from these postulates by deducing their logical and mathematical consequences, the development of theory in this new edition is essentially a significant difference, the same as in the original. For some reason, there's a lot of typos on very short words, like two-letter words. The only significant difference being in a few places where points that were originally somewhat vague have been clarified, or where more direct lines of development have been substituted for the earlier derivations. However, many problems are encountered in getting an unconventional work of this kind into print, and in order to make the original publication possible at all, it was necessary to limit the scope of the work, both as to the number of subjects covered and as to the extent to which the details of each subject were developed. For this reason, the purpose of this new edition is not only to bring the theoretical structure up to date by incorporating all of the advances that have been made in the last 20 years, but also to present the portions of the original results, approximately half of the total, that had to be omitted from the first section. Okay, we'll leave it there. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.